Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple minutes to let some more folks dial in, and then we'll dive in. Okay, I think we can get started. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this Indico Data webinar on how to enhance carrier decisioning through collaborative ecosystems. We're fortunate today to have Unqork, Guidewire, and EY with us here as well. Before we get started, we're just going to talk about some housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded, and everyone will receive access to the recording within 24 hours. All attendees will be muted until the end of the webinar, which is when we'll answer any questions, and we can unmute you if you'd like to speak live as well. Please submit questions. There's a panel right here to submit questions. We've dedicated time at the end to answer questions, so please send them in. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our host, Jeremy.
Awesome. Thanks, Talia. I'm your host for today, Jeremy Stinson, VP of Marketing at Indico Data. And as Talia said, really excited about today's topic and the lineup of guest speakers we have from Guidewire, Unqork, and EY. I'm going to turn it over to Farooq to start us off with introductions.
Jeremy, thank you, and thanks for having us here. My name is Farooq Sheikh. I'm the Global Head of Banking, Insurance, and Healthcare at Unqork. Glad to be here.
Awesome. And Mike, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Glad to be here, and thanks everyone else for attending. Mike Quintal, I'm the Vice President of our policy and billing areas at Guidewire. Been in the space for all over 10 years now with Guidewire, and so looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Awesome. David, why don't you round us out?
Awesome. So, hey, great to be here. Eager to share some of my experiences in and around AI and analytics. At E&Y, I'm a managing director, and I'm a leader within our P&C and insurance practice. So I live and breathe AI and data for insurance, and hopefully can share with you today some of my experiences and learning in around, how we improve analytics and data as an asset. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. All right, Talia, if you want to go to the next slide, we can dive right in. I'm going to spend a few minutes here setting the table for today's discussion, starting with some of the major challenges we're seeing carriers face in today's market that could be alleviated by leaning into an ecosystem strategy, a partnership strategy. At Indico, we feel strongly that the new battleground for insurers, for carriers, is all around decisioning. How do I make better decisions around the risk that I'm underwriting? How do I make better decisions around what claims to approve or deny? How do I make better decisions around what policies I should be prioritizing? And we feel that partnerships and ecosystems are really key to being able to make those better decisions across the policy lifecycle. And you can see on the slide here that today, the average underwriter is spending 70% of their time on non-underwriting activities, which leads to significant inefficiencies, missed opportunities, and poor decisioning. Moreover, with 90% of insurers planning to increase their investment in digital transformation over the next few years, the industry is clearly seeing that there's a need for change and recognizing this need to invest in technology to help flesh out these inefficiencies. Additionally, and we all know this, acquiring new customers is much more costly than retaining existing ones, highlighting the need for streamlined processes and enhanced customer experiences. Talia, if you want to go to the next slide. And so this kind of just summarizes the point here, right? As the insurance industry evolves, carriers are increasingly turning to integrated ecosystems to make more informed strategic decisions regarding risk underwriting, claims approval, policy servicing, so on and so forth. And so if you want to go to the next slide, Talia, I think we can go ahead and get into the meat of today's conversation. So this first slide here really talks to the AI and data side of things and how we can harness that to make better decisions. So advanced analytics and AI are pivotal in providing deeper insights, predicting trends, improving risk assessment. For instance, companies that invest in data analytics and AI are seeing significant improvements in fraud detection rates. And additionally, 86% of insurance companies are currently working on data analytics mechanisms for enhanced prediction capabilities. So I guess we'll start with you, David, with the first question here. How are you currently seeing carriers leverage advanced data analytics and AI to enhance risk assessment? What are some successful implementations that you've been a part of at EY?
Well, I think a couple things. When we look at enhancing the risk assessment, right? And I think when you talk about advanced analytics, with the innovation around Gen AI, I think at times we forget that advanced analytics, traditional AI, is still there and plays a critical impact, right? So when we're predicting, I feel like nothing's really changed. But when we talk about assessment and being able to leverage Gen AI, now we're focused on two key levers. My analytics always requires better data. And how do I get access to it? And how do I feed a model that is strong, right? Traditional, and frankly, low risk. We have risk structures. We can manage traditional AI, but more information, more detailed information, Gen AI, new technologies to bring in structured, unstructured data that actually can digitize it and share it across your ecosystem and others, right? Can I bring it into the front end? Can I take a form, put it into my policy system? Can I capture it for the downstream? All the technologies have made data sharing so much better and deeper, right? And I think back into the terms when I were on these calls 5 years ago, we were talking about democratization, access to data, direct access. I feel right now with the technologies in this space, especially around advanced data analytics, my analytics are more powerful. I have content to justify my analytics where I can go back and find the source document, the content, and those analytics are now embedded into my workflow, right? So I think analytics have always been there, but my access and my understanding and the deepening of them has clearly changed and at a very accelerated rate with Gen AI. So let me end there and turn it back to you, Jeremy. I think we're in a really good place, and analytics continues to drive our industry.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And we were joking before we started the webinar at how early we'd be before we went in Gen AI, and David gets the bingo card check off there for that one. But on that front, maybe this next question for you, Mike. You know, we look at Gen AI, we look at discriminative AI. There's a whole bunch of different flavors of AI out there. In your experience, what specific AI technologies are most effective in predicting trends, improving decision-making processes across underwriting claims? How are you sort of guiding Guidewire customers through this decisioning?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I mean, I think, David brought up a good point. It starts with data integrity, first and foremost, and how you implement certain strategies of AI. Right. I think historically, AI is not a new concept as far as introducing analytics to the workflow. We've seen transformer models for a while now, right, with GPT and BERT now. I mean, there's a lot of opportunities to enhance, and I think a lot of carriers and our customers have implemented them correctly in customer interactions, improvements, and the simple use cases that are out there. I think the exciting piece now is taking some of the more advanced transformer models that we're seeing in NLP and other areas to really enhance and automate data intake, both structured and unstructured data mentioned, and really give direct throughput to operational workflows. I think that's the next step that is really exciting, that gives us a lot of opportunity in there. I think another one that I'm excited for as it builds momentum is kind of some of the explainable AI. I know there's a lot of regulatory pressure out there around transparency and how you're using it, whether it's in pricing decisions, claims decisions, et cetera. And it's a lot of, I'll say, operating in the unknown a bit on how we can be transparent, especially in highly regulated environments like the US is. So, those types of advancements and being very critical and understanding what I'm deploying, how I'm deploying, and having that be transparent to the end user and regulatory environment is going to be critical as it scales. So.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a good transition into another question I want to send your way, Farooq. What are some of the challenges that carriers face when integrating AI and data platforms? Mike touched on a few there, right, with data integrity, explainability, transparency. But what are some additional challenges that you see carriers facing on this front?
Great question. And it's a place and a challenge that just increased, right? Like historically, all the carriers had the issue around data silos, right? And data access and availability and quality and so forth. And that challenge continues even now with some of the legacy platforms and infrastructure that a lot of the carriers have in place, right? But now what we have is another layer and another challenge on top, which is, as you look at AI, whether it's the traditional type of machine learning AI, whether it's the generative AI and the utilization of LLMs, that part of the technology stack is just moving so quickly, where there are new advancements being made, new models being kind of made available to people directly from various companies, as well as through some of the largest cloud service providers, right? So now you have this situation where not only do you have a data silo problem to resolve, you also have a LLM adoption and flexibility problem to resolve. And then I think one thing I do want to acknowledge that Mike mentioned, and traceability, right? Not only LLMs and Gen AI and machine learning, all of these things don't allow for the ability for a regulator or a consumer to understand how the decision was made. So being able to wrap traceability inside of an LLM approach is also kind of a third layer of challenge here. So what we're seeing across the industry is like a very focused approach on how do you reduce data silos? How do you access data across multiple systems, including legacy systems? How do you construct, even temporarily, data models that define what data you need for certain kind of service outcomes, whether it's underwriting, whether it's claims, whether it's operations broadly? How do you layer in one or multi-model, right? Because increasingly we're seeing the world move into a multi-LLM scenario, where certain LLMs are better for task A versus B, and newer versions or different types of LLMs are coming out pretty rapidly that specialize in advancements in certain areas. And then you wrap that into a traceability outcome where at least the decision-making parts of the process have traceability associated with them. So these are the three layers where we're seeing carriers do a lot of work. We're also seeing solutions come together that bring these concepts together, right? Because that's a lot of work to be done in the context of a single insurer and by a single insurer. So I think what we are seeing and what we'll see more and more of is ecosystems and partnerships pull these three layers together. How do you get data out of siloed systems? How do you get the multi-LLM availability in the context of a client? And how do you then wrap in traceability in the context of specific decisions? That will really help the industry.
Yeah, it's a good point. And maybe a follow-up for you, Farooq, and you kind of touched on this when you were answering that last question, but the change is so fast. Like even for us who are like in this day in and day out, we live, breathe, sleep, eat AI, generative LLMs. It's hard for us to keep up with the change, right? Because the pace is so fast. How do you recommend, or what advice would you have for carriers in terms of how they can keep up with the change and really understand like what is the best technology that I should be leaning into here for my given use case? How are you giving that guidance to customers today?
Yeah, no, very, very good question, right? And it's one of those things where given you don't, in multiple layers of this tech stack, the LLM layer as well as the traceability layer, you don't know today what is going to be the winners of tomorrow, right? Like there are certain players that are moving very quickly, but it really depends on the day of the week that you have this conversation and the latest kind of model that has been deployed by any of the large players in the market, right? And all of them are making really good progress and very focused efforts on this topic, right? So I think the prioritization here eventually is around two dimensions that we are seeing across our leading clients, right? Like we're looking at a flexibility dimension. How can you make it easy to change any decisions that you make today? Where can you incorporate new models, incorporate new specific capabilities? How can you make it easier and more flexible for the adoption of technology that may not be available today, right? So that's one element that really has to be central to your decision making. And I think the second element is around the data center of gravity, right? Like, because I think David said this in the very beginning, right? Like AI, there's no value in AI unless it's driven by your data, right? And your ability to bring in external data, internal data together, right? So the data center of gravity needs to be addressed systematically across the board. And it can't be done in a organizational-wide area, but it can be done in the use case specific approach, right? Like, hey, we can rethink data availability as it pertains to underwriting. We can rethink data availability as it pertains to claims or customer service, right? So those two dimensions are critical. And then obviously always look at it from an ecosystem and solution approach. Are there players that are bringing the ecosystem together that are easy to work with across the industry that can pre-integrate into some of the existing providers? Those are the kind of dimensions we look at.
Data center of gravity. I like that. I might have to steal that one.
Hey, Jeremy?
Yeah, David, go for it.
I just want to quickly, Farooq said it very, very well, but I feel like we do tend, when we hear data challenges, to overly focus on technology. I feel like, and I'll just share some of the missteps that I've seen with some of my partners where, hey, we're eager to innovate, new technology. Things are really accelerating and I want to be on that flow. But we sometimes forget that the amount of data that's coming through is going to break some of our more challenging roles with insurance: data management, data governance, controlling privately identifiable information. Farooq, you spoke to, hey, we're going to break down, share data internally, eventually with external partners like regulators, other partners in our ecosystem. Like, all of those governance pieces tend to get overwhelmed when we innovate. So I think a lot of times when I've seen my clients misstep, they jumped into the technology, they do a POC, they innovate, and then all of a sudden they realize the C-suite, CISO, security, they're not on the same path in the same step. They realize that capacity underwriters don't have the ability to validate and adopt new technology because they're not prepared for it. So I think I just wanted to put an exclamation mark on people, process, and technology, because I feel like technology, it's proven. We got great vendors, great ecosystem. It's more our ability to keep humans at the center, understand it, adopt, and scale a lot of our existing processes, management, risk controls, because that's where we tend to see early in innovation stall and slow. So
Yeah,
thank you.
It's a really good point. Great. Well, Ty, if you want to go to the next slide. So I think this next slide, the point we want to talk through here is around how to best form strategic partnerships. And you can see the data point here. A significant 75% of global insurance executives view digital ecosystems and partnerships as crucial for gaining a competitive edge. I think on this one, we'll start with you, Mike. On the topic of strategic partnerships, in your mind, what are the key factors to consider when forming these ecosystems, these strategic partnerships, and how can carriers ensure they're maximizing their investment here?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I mean, I'm glad I got this question, to be honest, because I feel like at Guidewire particularly, we take a similar approach to, I think, what carriers should think about in forming partnerships, right? We've got a very robust, as both Indico and Unqork know, robust marketplace, right? Where we try and embrace the leaders in the space that can really enhance what we offer as a core admin system. But we don't take any taker, right, of who wants to be a partner. We do an extensive vetting process in our partnership criteria and how we look at, are you aligned correctly to our core values, to our core competencies, and make sure there's no overlap. And that's the key for me when we guide carriers as well. When I have conversations with our customers, they're always asking us who's the right partner for fraud detection or who's the right partner for XYZ, right? And it's very important to consider options 100%, right? We give more than one option. Our marketplace is an example to give flexibility of choice. But you have to look at 3 or 4 critical factors, a couple of them being alignment to your joint goals, right? Like, what is the understanding of your use case you're trying to achieve? Is there value of organizational alignment as well, just core value alignment? Sometimes it's taken a bit, off the cuff, but it is truly important when you're looking at partnership and making investments in technology companies and partners to know that there's alignment at a leadership level, at a goal level, and there. I think too, as you build kind of the broader stack, looking at an Unqork solution, a Guidewire solution, an Indigo solution as a collective, there has to be core competencies that each play a part in, right? There's a lot of vendors out there that, dabble in a million different things and say they can do a lot. And that can be a bit, unknown of how I tackle certain solutions. And we see a lot of challenges and frankly, failures in the market implementation-wise, trying to do too much based on what a core competency vendor might be, right? So having clarity in use case, I love players in the vendor space that are very focused on use cases, right? Instead of just making a horizontal play, saying we do this, right? And it becomes very clear for customers. And I think from a carrier perspective, those are the vendors I'd be attracted to, who have a clear direction of where they're going and the value prop they serve in the market. So those are at least my take on a couple of key categories there.
Yeah, I think super important point you made there around starting with the end in mind first, right? Starting with the use case. And that's the exact same thing we say to our customers, right? And we've seen it time and time again when we approach a customer or prospect approaches us and they don't have a clearly defined use case. It's more like, well, we have an AI agenda that we need to fulfill here. And it's like, well, how about we talk about the actual business outcomes you're trying to drive first and work backwards? And when you frame it that way, it tends to be a way more successful engagement with the customer. So definitely agree on that point. Maybe this next question for you, Farooq, on the topic of data sharing. How can carriers ensure safe and secure data sharing between ecosystem partners? And maybe touch on the role that you see regulations playing in that topic.
It's a pretty fluid landscape, right? Like, and I'm saying this a little bit tongue in cheek, right? Like the regulatory element of insurance is one of the kind of most challenging element, right? Because you're getting into situations where not only you have regulations around what data you can collect, you also have regulations around what data you can store and handle and so forth, as well as what can you use to underwrite. And that applies across every line of business, right? So everything from life insurance, where you have very strict kind of limitations around data regulatory wise that you can use for underwriting purposes, to P&C on the home and auto side, all the way to commercial, you have a fair amount of regulations to comply with. And then this becomes even more complicated for any global organization or global risk, right? Because then you get into European data privacy and residency requirements, as well as some of the other geographies and so forth, right? So having a regulatory hat and a compliance hat on in terms of data gathering, leveraging it from analytics, underwriting, and then sharing is critical. The ability to handle, and this, like, again, right, like I think David made the comment, right, like not all of these solutions are technology solutions, but managing data privacy, for example, complying with HIPAA or, some of the European regulations, for example, a lot of that requires process sophistication as well as technology sophistication. Managing data around PIIs, specifically personally identified information, is critical, right? So the ability to understand the business you're in, the ability to devise the right sharing mechanisms, and it's actually quite interesting. In the early days of LLMs as they came out, a number of large organizations got in trouble because they shared, for example, some of their code snippets, right, to specific LLMs, and those got released into the wild, and it became a public issue. Now, thankfully, there wasn't a customer information or some of the more complicated or regulatorily kind of important information, but still it is a case in point of you have to manage your data very, very carefully, including how you expose your data to your partners and to some of the kind of emerging pieces of technology, and manage that data kind of control. I think I mentioned that term around data center of gravity. That is critical. What is your data center of gravity? Where is your crown jewels? How do you protect those? What element on a need-to-know basis do you share with your strategic partners, whether these are LLM providers, whether these are technology providers, whether these are TPAs and BPOs, right? Because those also have quite a bit of access to your data environments, and limiting that control is critical from an insurance perspective.
Yeah, I mean, this could have probably been a topic in and of itself for webinar, to be honest. So maybe for the next one. Maybe the last question on this topic, we'll go to you, David. Can you provide examples of innovative solutions that you've seen working at EY, of different partners going together and providing value? What have you seen in your time at EY there?
So lots, and I think innovation has really accelerated, right? But I'm going to try to look at the insurance value chain just for the groups, because claims, underwriting, it's hitting in every part of how we do business. And I feel like this lens to digital customer service, right, efficiencies, really lends itself to this topic today. The landscape, better managing data, being able to integrate data has a lot of big value prop, right? But there's things that we just couldn't do. And I'll start with first notice loss claims, right? Typically, you have a loss, you pick up the phone, you call. After an accident, let's say it's severe, are you calm? Probably not, right? You're probably not at your best moment, right? You're relying on the person on the other side of that phone to take you through a pretty traumatic experience, right? Now with new technology, right? One of the innovation things that I saw is, hey, I can take that recorded call, I can take it from a audio file, structure it, digitize it, and validate all the content that was typed in, right? And that's where, when we talk about innovation, hey, I'm going to use Gen AI, I'm going to use Doc Intelligence, I'm going to take all this content and bring it in and validate it, right? Where innovation comes in, what if I'm telematics, right? What if I have telematics and I trigger and already have the loss event, right? So you're calling at that first moment, I've already brought in a file, right? A real-time file that said, hey, this is a 99% chance of an accident. It's occurred. This is where it occurred. This is where the car is now. And this is the projected severity, right? So now from a customer experience, this innovation has changed. A panicked person that's had a traumatic event's not leading the call and the content, right? They're not slowed and frustrated because someone's typing and not getting all the content. It's almost a confirmation. Hey, I see, right, you're at this intersection. I see that there's multiple cars, right? So it's almost like the ability to interact where the claimant is and one of their most traumatic experiences, right? I think if we move from customer lens to just internal and revenue growth, I'll just give one more use case, we'll run out of time, but underwriting submission, right? In this ecosystem, there's more of a focus on carrier sharing risk with reinsurers, right? Sharing data, submissions, brokers coming in and taking very complex specialty insurance, right? That isn't a simple quote, right? Typically, I get an email of 20 documents, some in Excel, some PDF, right? And vendors in their own island can't really process this, right? With the innovation that's going on, I can take that content, pull it from an email, digitize it, structure it, and then bring in my traditional AI and ML, which I led with, right? I have this content that typically was on someone's laptop that's now digitized. I can put it in my core system. I can put it into my predictive analytics model almost real time. That predictive analytics model is going to come back and say, this submission is aligned to my appetite. This is business that I want. It's profitable. I'm going to put it at the top of the list. Out of the 1,000 submissions, here's the top 10 that's going to be profitable for me. And not only am I going to take that and assign it to someone, I'm going to take that digital information. I'm going to feed it into my CRM tool. I'm going to assign someone from it. So instead of all that manual triage and interaction, I've captured all the content. I've created a knowledge repository to summarize and get people up to speed, but I've primed all the pumps of all the dependent systems, right? So I think when we talk integration, giving answers quickly and kind of a knowledge management, that innovation on the back end of sharing the data, Farooq talked about this, like we're sharing data real time, structuring it, getting it more accurate to breathe innovation, realize that value prop of automation, taking not minutes, but hours, days out of that underwriting work, right? That adjuster is starting from a much better place. They're much more efficient because they're starting with better information. And I think those are just two examples of an exhaustive list that spans the full value chain.
Yeah, but really, really, really good examples, I'd say, and kind of hits on the sort of point I was making initially where, my opinion is that this technology really can help folks move from the mundane, repetitive tasks of data gathering, data input, filling out spreadsheets to what you had just said, David, like let's have these underwriters who have 3 years of experience spend their time focusing on making the right decisions around what risks to underwrite, what policies prioritize. And I think what you just outlined there is sort of the exact promise that we want to deliver on. So great. All right, Talia, let's go to the next slide. Good. So this next slide really talks about operational efficiency, right? So the next point we want to focus on is how ecosystems, strategic alliances, partnerships, whatever you want to call them, can help carriers improve efficiencies by integrating various tools and platforms. There's a few other sort of benefits that can happen here around streamlining operations, reducing costs, improving the customer experience, importantly. For example, a substantial portion of insurance companies are investing in AI-based systems for underwriting. This is kind of the point that David was making when he was talking to the prior use case. And the aim there is to enhance operational efficiency. Effective integration strategies not only reduce costs, but also positively impact business performance by optimizing workflows and providing better customer service. I guess the first question here, I'll pass to you, Farooq. What are some best practices for how carriers can successfully integrate these various tools to streamline operations? What are you seeing there?
I think this is a very good question, right? And if I compare this back to like 10 years ago, right? Like, so this problem has been there for a while, right? Like this whole, how do we integrate our internal technology better? And how do we bring in external data and external technology in a faster way, right? It has been there and has been kind of one of those issues that has been a perpetual problem for the industry for, the last 20 years, 10 years, whatever direction you want to look at it. If I look at it 10 years ago, the prevailing wisdom was I, the carrier or kind of the insurer, has to pick the best of breed solutions or best of breed technology data across a large variety of my vendor partners. And I am responsible for pulling them together and putting them together and making them work and talk to each other, integrate and so forth, right? And I think the evolution that we have all seen slowly, and it's picking up pace now, is that onus is no longer on the insurer to the same extent that it used to be, right? So it's now becoming a ecosystem, marketplace, pre-integration kind of a conversation. And I think Mike referenced the Guidewire marketplace and the partnership program, that is like one example of a very sophisticated ecosystem and partnership play that requires and provides some level of standardization around both the technical capability of the vendor as well as the interoperability across the ecosystem. And there are others, like all the cloud service providers have their own marketplaces and so forth, right? So we're seeing this world where the carriers are now saying, hey, rather than me trying to figure out how the 10 providers of data, AI, and technology work together, why don't you guys, the 10 providers, work together to figure out how you work together? What roles should you play? How you should provide access to data, integrations, where you can pre-build some of the snippets, because a lot of these snippets and integrations are reusable from one carrier, like they're industry-wide initiatives and activity. And we're also seeing in some markets, London market being one example, more standardization from a data perspective, right? So you're seeing the Lloyd's kind of leading the way in terms of standardization of the data models that are utilized, and Australia is another market where there's some level of data standardization. But this whole, we will as an industry expect our vendor partners to more easily work together and come to us with more pre-built integrations and solutions is now the expectation very much. And that's kind of where we expect the AI space to move towards, where you're pre-integrated with one or more LLM platforms, where you're pre-integrated with lots of data sources, for example, from major providers of data in the insurance industry. So that's kind of where I see the industry headed and where there's a lot of value for the industry.
Yeah, really good point. I think maybe this next question I'll toss to you, Mike, around cost reduction. What are the most effective strategies for reducing operational costs through an ecosystem? And how do these strategies impact overall business performance?
Yeah, it's a good follow-up to Farooq's comments too, because I think earlier we addressed the importance of data governance and change management practice when talking about this, right, and data integrity, and not dismiss technology as the not most important, but it is important in this perspective, right, of thinking about what you do at a platform level can drastically improve cost reduction over time, and establishing how you modernize there first, right? Obviously self-serving for Guidewire, but there's perspectives of that where I've seen a lot of our customers saying, as the industry, whether you're on Guidewire or not, but industry perspective, there's a need and understanding that there is a migration to cloud that has to occur, right? From legacy to modern capabilities at a stack level has to be achieved as the next step. And that doesn't necessarily mean just your core level, right? The data platform perspective is something we're seeing at every customer as a consideration to happen in parallel, right? With any other of your cloud migration approaches, right? So we've seen it as a trend, whether how fast they're able to address it or not as a customer is a different perspective, right? But it's known as a top priority, saying like, hey, if I consolidate my enterprise platform systems to a data lake perspective on Snowflake or whatever it might be, right? That gives a lot of scalability and flexibility. It's all the topics we're talking about, right? Of saying, I do have confidence in my internal first-party data integrity as a first perspective. I think other considerations, just when we're thinking about, the systems you have internally of feeding the engine of that first-party data, your core system plays a huge role. And historically, we've seen different, strategies of how you approach kind of core system needs across your ecosystem, whether it's a system for personal lines, a separate system for commercial lines. I think there's an ability as we scale in platform perspective to consolidate those core systems into one, given kind of the microservice approach that a lot of vendors are taking, the vast ecosystem we have of parties that play different roles that maybe historically we saw in one system, right? That can be broken up now. So you can have really economies of scale and a single platform strategy to really reduce costs and efficiency across the board on both policy and claims, right? I think it's a great perspective of thinking about how I approach not the 2-year, 3-year journey to adopt the latest trend, but think at a platform journey for cost reduction at a 5 to 10 to 15-year kind of investment perspective that enables everything we've been talking about already, right? I think that's some of the key principles that I would bring to the table for customers for sure.
Yeah, a good point. Maybe as a follow-up, David, the goal here obviously for carriers is to improve efficiencies, customer experience, so on and so forth, but how do they go about measuring that? Are there specific data points that they should look at that say, okay, these investments are paying off, I'm driving an ROI here? How do you think about that?
Well, I think if we look at the prior questions, tool integration, cost reduction, right? If we focus on those things, intrinsically, it's going to lead to better customer experience, right? And I think insurers are looking at what I call a 360-degree view to this, right? If we're using new technology to automate, streamline, it's going to be a better customer experience, right? For example, customers want answers quickly, right? We are about speed to market. I want you to understand me. I want you to service me accurately, right? And I won't poll the group. How many's been on a call with a customer service rep and they answer the question multiple times and transfer you to multiple people, right? To me, yeah, that is probably one of the trying your patience as a customer kind of, especially in claims, right? Like I have my first notice of loss example, like I need quick answers. I don't want to hear I'm waiting for the system, right? And then internally, when you talk to an adjuster, you talk to an underwriter, I've asked them for metrics, like what is impactful for you? Because when you're doing innovation, like you're going to have to get these people to use these new streamline systems, right? Because they see efficiencies, effectiveness may make their job harder. And I love some of the metrics I got from an underwriter. I want you to limit the number of screens I have to open to rate a submission. I want you to remove X number of spreadsheets from my process. Right? I don't want to take an email. I don't want to bring it down. So I almost feel like the real innovators are coming up with some new metrics, right? And I'd say leading indicators. Hey, if I am getting ingested contents from an email and I'm not clicking 20 times, track the clicks, right? Are you getting those efficiencies? And I'll tell you what, if you hit the mark, an underwriter's like, hey, I'm looking at one screen. I have a smart knowledge management repository where I can chat, I can get answers instantly. Right? And with this new technology, as we ingest data, I can reference back to the rating manual. I can reference back to predictive analytics. Everything becomes point and click to gain that efficiency, right? And if I'm servicing submissions more accurately, faster, my partner is going to be ecstatic. My customer is going to be ecstatic if I ask the question once, share it across my ecosystem internally, and get them off the call, not minutes faster, but like significantly faster. So I think it's speed, tangible metrics, and I think your more traditional metrics still are there, right? What's my time to close a claim? What's my time to submission? Is my submission accurate? Did I win? All those metrics are still there. They're more lagging and they're still valid, but I feel like to drive the adoption of these new technologies, get to those leading, more tangible, pragmatic ones that drive not only adoption, not only makes it easier internally, it just removes frictions with your customer, your partners, and like the old phrase, right? If we do this automation right, it raises all the boats, right? You may be selfish just to make an underwriter's job better, but it's going to make everybody's experience better, right? So I feel like intrinsically integration, cost reduction should be linked to a value prop of a better customer experience. And intrinsically, typically it is.
Yeah, awesome. Really, really good points. Okay, Talia, let's go to the next slide, which is the last one before questions. And I'm going to ask Farooq, David, and Mike to take out their crystal balls here. So this last slide is really all about looking ahead. And so there's several trends here shaping the insurance ecosystem landscape. that you can see on the slide there. There's an expected growth in tech spend set to enhancing customer experience and foundational capabilities. And then additionally, you can see there that there's expected growth within the P&C carrier landscape as well at around 2%. And so I guess, we'll start with you, David. If you look out over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, what emerging technologies do you see playing a critical role in the insurance ecosystem? What sort of sticks out in your mind?
My gosh, I'll keep it short and simple and keep it focused, because that could go on a long answer. But I feel like with emergence technologies, right? Doc intelligence started as just OCR. It's merged into intelligent solutions. Now it's merged into intelligent ingestion, right? And at the rate we're going, it's hard to say, hey, where are we going to end up in this? But I feel like from a business perspective, I feel like one of the biggest trends that we're seeing right now is this inability to break up risk. Carriers need to get reinsurance, right? Insurance intrinsically is riskier, right? Making people whole is more expensive than it used to be. I won't go into all the leading trends, but due to catastrophes, to weather, to supply chain, there's more challenges. But if we can create risk exchange, be able to use this new technology to literally diversify.
I think we lost David. No worries.
Yep.
We'll keep cruising. He was right in the middle of a great answer, unfortunately. Maybe we'll turn to you, Farooq, with the same question, but maybe have your answer be a bit more focused on what carriers can do to prepare now for the changes that are coming as we look out over the next 5 years or so.
It's a great question, Randy. I think about it as two major initiatives, or three maybe, right? So one is ensure that you are making decisions that increase your flexibility, right? The one thing we know, and if you go back 2 years, nobody heard, well, not many people were familiar with the term Gen AI, right? And now we're sitting here, to your point, Jeremy, right? Like, it's one of the first words that comes up in any insurance conversation around modernization and tech improvement. So having the ability to have a flexible operational and technology ecosystem that can incorporate some of the latest and greatest enhancements across any number of dimensions, whether it's in the summarization area, IDP, whether it's in the chatbot space, whether it's in the adjudication space, traceability, etc. Right? So just being very flexible as you make decisions. Each decision should increase your rate of change. So that's one area. And I think there's another big area which insurers are starting to invest in, and I think this is about building leadership capability, right? Like, historically, insurance, good or bad, like factually, if you just look at it, it's been very insular in terms of the folks that have spent their time in insurance, that understand the industry. There hasn't been as much people coming into the industry from deep tech backgrounds or other kind of areas where technology has been a bigger part of their transformation journey, right? So building leadership teams that are familiar and aware of what is going on in banking, in healthcare, in retail, and in e-commerce, and that can bring that kind of talent and capabilities within an insurance company is critical, right? Like, so the way I see it is, you may not know where insurance is going right now. We kind of generally know that there will be more and more work to be done from a transformation perspective. So as long as you're making decisions that increase your flexibility and you're bringing in people and bringing them along the journey, you will be in a good place, right? And failure to do either or both will make it more and more difficult for the industry to catch up.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Maybe the last one over to you, Mike. What long-term impacts do you foresee from the adoption of these integrated ecosystems, particularly in terms of maybe both industry competition and then also consumer expectations?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about customer expectations, right? That's driven the market for a while now. I think the exciting piece with the advancement in collaborative ecosystems is really this notion and trend of hyper-personalization, right? I think it's critical now, and it'll only get exciting for the future, of saying customers expect the experience to be as personalized as possible, right? That's first perspective. And that's just going to drive more competition in both the vendor landscape and the carrier landscape, right? Of saying, I have to make personalized product offerings, segmented product offerings, et cetera. And we're seeing a lot of carriers already trying to tackle that. But the longer term impact is exciting because it is going to create a more flexible kind of consumer environment on how you buy and interact with insurance products that I'm hopeful will drive more trust in the industry, where I think in a lot of areas it's lacking right now from a consumer experience and how much we trust our carriers at a personal level, right? I live in California, tough market for all of us right now here. I know in Florida as well, right? There's a lot of people that aren't in the industry that are navigating those barriers right now of just trust. So I think the more we can invest in technology to support that end kind of CX vision that we all idealize around, I think it's critical. And the other aspect too, longer term, that I've seen a lot of customers lean on, of our customers at least, is making a more tangible investment in risk control, risk mitigation that's passed on to the customer, right? Of saying, I don't not only want to write as much risk as possible and the best risk that's profitable for me, but also make sure I'm approaching my customer with strategies on how to minimize risk, right? That plays a huge role in end-to-end kind of use case value that we're seeing a lot more kind of tangible investment being done in to really incorporate risk control practices in the underwriting process that I think is very exciting, and how we incorporate those aspects into that decision making and pricing. So
awesome. Great. And it looks like we've got David back.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, all good. It wouldn't be a live webinar if there wasn't at least one technical glitch. So all good. All right. Well, I think that does it. We can move to questions now. Tally, if you want to the next slide there. So looking, we got a few that have come in here from the audience. I don't know, Tally, if you want to tee those up for the group.
Yeah, sure. The first one is, how can smaller carriers without extensive resources effectively participate in collaborative ecosystems?
Yeah, maybe, I know, Mike, Guidewire has a good focus on the mid-market. Maybe you take this answer.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of strategies in how you approach it, right? There's kind of a digital first mentality that a lot of customers approach, where it's kind of the cheaper entry into it. I think it's a good strategy to kind of evaluate and consider the long-term path towards it, because we talked about kind of platform dependencies to really scale and make that achievement of value of the investment tangible. And I think that does require a core competency of the platform itself that you integrate the digital first strategy to. I know there's a lot of vendors. We have two solutions, for example, that meet both mid-market, which is our kind of bread and butter product, but also a lower market offering, Insurance Now. Both cloud native, both give flexibility of choice in how you approach this modernization perspective. I know there's many vendors out there that are doing that approach, right? So there's, I think the biggest thing that we touched on before of picking partnerships is pick a partner that's transparent about and guiding you as a partner with you, right? It can't be a true just, I want to sell you whatever I have, right? It has to be a partnership and saying, what's your need? What's your value prop you're trying to achieve? And through just tangible conversations and transparent conversations, as a lower market carrier that just has a tight budget year over year, there should be strategies to get there that the vendor should achieve with you, right? There should be a stake in the game with that vendor, and not just trying to force feed a solution based on what they have, right? So that's what I would kind of give perspective to.
Yeah, maybe
Jeremy, I was gonna just add something, if that's okay, right? Like the one concept that we're seeing a lot of is, in terms of transformation, especially in the mid-market and lower mid-market space, break down transformation into much smaller chunks, right? They get into whether it's, people have different reactions to the term agile or, kind of any of the other terminology, but the point is you should be able to see tangible progress in months and kind of not wait for a multi-year outcome and there are certain kind of programs that will take time, right? That's okay. But as you look at the set of activity you need to complete, there are areas and efforts that should be able to conclude in a very robust and fast way.
Yeah, David, anything?
I'll add one piece in there too. Middle market has an advantage over your tier one, right? The price point is fairly low. This is subscription based. Use it, you pay for it. To Farooq's point, you start with a simple use case, you get value right away. But if you look at an organization, there's really some systemic barriers keeping you from innovating. Is my data there? Is it managed? You know, is it ready? I think when you're a smaller carrier, you can be very nimble. You can really use this technology to innovate at a speed, quite frankly, larger organizations may struggle with. So there is some cost barriers. You can work through that, start small, right? You have to learn skills, but everyone does. But I would say, you know, the middle market has a lot faster line of sight to building momentum and value with organizations that are at a higher scale and a lot more complex.
Yeah, it's a good point. This next question, maybe we'll start with you, David. It's a good one. What are the potential risks and downsides of relying too heavily on AI for a lot of the processes and use cases we've been discussing?
I'll lead with a design principle that I feel like most people in the industry have embraced, calling keeping humans at the center. And what I mean by that is AI, it can predict, right? And we've always had bias in AI, right? Gen AI hasn't really created new risks, but boy, is it really pressure cooking them. Like there's a lot more scale, a lot more complexity to that. But I think keeping humans at the center will help us in many ways, right? It lowers our risk. Humans are making the decisions, right? Humans, even for a straight through process, like, hey, here's the decision you should make. Well, no, Gen AI is not going to do that. AI is not going to do that. It's going to make a recommendation. The human's going to understand the analytics behind it. I'm going to pull in that content, fact-based. Hey, here's your rating plan. This submission, this quote is missing 4 things. All this new technology helps me resolve outliers, get to a better decision, right? But when it comes down to it, managing risk is really letting the human still own the decision, right? And I would project we're going to get asked like, hey, where's the trend going to be? It terrifies me. At some point, maybe the human's not at the center anymore. But I feel like as we're going through innovation, the technology fastly matures, your organization matures, humans need to own the decision. If you make the decision for them, they won't accept the solution, first of all, right? So you won't have acceptance. But, you know, especially on external customer reactions, you need the human to still be a human, make the decision, be accountable to that underwriting decision, be accountable for that claims action that they're taking, because the human at the end of the day owns the process and owns the output.
Yep. What about you, Farooq?
I think this is one of those things where the industry as a whole, like I think insurance somehow ends up focusing on the most complex problems, right? And the idea is that, hey, if you can solve the complex problems, then you can solve everything, right? And I appreciate and understand where folks come from when they start thinking about it in that way. But I do have to say that there are a large number of issues that are not the most complex that can deliver value and should be addressed first, right? So like a little bit of this, and the industry is complex and carriers prefer solving for complex problems, and there's a lot to do, a lot of low-hanging fruit, so to speak, right, around customer journey, customer experience. David mentioned F&OL and claims management capabilities, and that can be more easily attained, can be a combination of people, process, technology, getting the basics right. And there's an opportunity there for everyone to focus on just basic blocking, tackling, moving the needle along before we get into the super complex end of the journey, right? That's kind of my sense here, that there's enough value for us to create as an industry by focusing on the simple things.
Yeah, what's your point of view, Mike?
Yeah, I want to add one thing, is because it's super important. I think Farooq made a good point on understanding the complexity of the use case you're trying to solve. I think equally important is somewhat of a self-reflection of who you are from a maturity perspective to understand this technology and dive in, right? Understanding the target, understanding what you can achieve is crucially important, because then it'll dictate how complex of a problem you try and solve right away. You know, Dave made a great point. Ease into it. It's a crawl, walk, run for some carriers, right? And having human in the loop as a part of that strategy early to drive towards an end state of automation can be great, right, as a goal, but you can't dive into the deep end right away sometimes. So, you know, having that point of self-reflection oftentimes is a critical point in the conversations we have with customers of saying, what are you trying to achieve and what's the achievability in your operational workflow and understanding of how you can get there. So,
yeah. Well, good. I think we're almost at time, Talia, so I think we could end here. Awesome.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and thank you, Farooq, David, and Mike.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
See you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
All right.